Welcome to Part 10, Ron's Lehigh River Valley, Lehigh Gap, Wind Gap, and Delaware Water Gap. The area between Allentown and Lehigh Gap was about 15 miles north. It was once known as the cement capital of the nation. I had two choices in which to model, Lehigh Gap or the Lehigh Gorge. I chose the Lehigh Gorge, so we won't be seeing any models of Lehigh Gap in this issue. The minerals in the soil combined with other aggregates made for good cement production. Many companies sprung up to take advantage of it.
This aerial animation shows active and abandoned quarries on a line from Lower Mount Bethel, located on the Delaware River, westward to Ironton, a distance of approximately 23 miles. As you can see, minerals were abundant in this region.
The Hercules cement plant near Stockertown, PA, in 1979. Nazareth, PA, is on the distance. Note evidence of many distant plants. The Nazareth Society of Model Engineers is at the old firehouse in Stockertown, pretty close to the Hercules plant. There are two layouts composed of O-gauge trains on the second floor and HO gauge on the ground floor. They are open intermittently during the year for open house visitors. A view just south of Lehigh Gap looking southwest in 1979. Just west of the Lehigh lay the Keystone Lamp Company, a big Lehigh Valley Railroad customer. Today it's a big flea market building. Note stretch of hills in the rear. This group of mountains forms the Appalachian Trail, which runs all the way to Georgia from Maine. The trail begins at Baxter State Park in Maine. The first light of day that hits the United States strikes Mount Catardin in the middle of the park, which is about 5,000 feet high. Mount Washington is higher, but it is much further west. I visited the park in October 1971. At the time, the state wanted to keep the area wild and woolly. Campers were not allowed at the time. How that changed in the following years. As in the picture, it contains astounding scenery. Watching a sunrise just south of Front Royal, Virginia, on the Appalachian Trail. From Front Royal, you can follow the Appalachian Trail in your car, driving all the way on Skyline Drive a few hundred miles south. Haze, especially in the summer months, obscures the most magnificent views. Looking directly north from south of Lehigh Gap, Keystone Company is at the left, next to the Lehigh Valley tracks. Jersey Central tracks are on the east side of the Lehigh. In the far distance is Palmerton, PA. The Lehigh Valley Station just south of Lehigh Gap, about 1910. The Jersey Central tracks still had two lines through Lehigh Gap at this time in 1974. But not for long. Conrail was coming in 1976, and the Lehigh on the other side of the river would soon be torn up. A 4-hour time exposure. The North Star was bisected from an aircraft during the exposure. No worry about a train coming, as the camera is positioned in the middle of the tracks, but the line has been long abandoned. A close-up view of the Chain Bridge looking west in 1900. Jersey Central tracks are in the foreground. Looking south from the hillside about 1910. The Chain Bridge was the only way to get across the Lehigh at this time, and the old highway layout is evident. In more modern times, Lehigh Valley Alcohol Century diesels are passing the toll house. Lehigh Valley Railroad gained control of Jersey Central lines in Pennsylvania in 1972. 4 years later, the whole mess went to the Conrail. A Delaware and Hudson train is passing the old toll house. It's July 1981. It's now single track, and the toll house is a permanent home for someone. The bridge has been rebuilt. The toll house had been taken over by the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society, a group that deals with hard coal locomotives in the Northeast. Their magazine covers much information about non-existing hard coal railroads. Before the pandemic, they had over 1,000 members, many from overseas. They meet in the Quakertown Reading Station once a month. Here is the station in 1974, when the Reading Railroad still had a connecting track to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The Chessie Steam Special passing the station in April 1977. The train was on its way from Bethlehem to Baltimore to begin the summer excursion runs. Classic Trains magazine ran a Lehigh Gap story in the spring 2023 issue. Lehigh and New England locomotive 404 with a full train coal load eastbound crossing the bridge at Lehigh Gap. This locomotive is a 210 wheel arrangement. The same locomotive returning to the mines with an empty coal train. No lack of vegetation on the hillside due to fumes from the nearby zinc plant. A 3-unit American Locomotive Company empty coal train about 1950 is returning to the mines. Notice the type of bridge construction. The Lehigh, New England dieselized with 2 types of locomotives from the American Locomotive Company, road switcher types and FA cab types. These are Weaver models on the Lehigh Valley Bridge over the Delaware River at Easton, PA, and Phillipsburg, New Jersey on Ron's O-scale layout. Note bridge construction similar to the L&N Bridge at Lehigh Gap. They were both built within 10 years of one another, perhaps by the same contractor. The Weaver factory at Northumberland in 2010. Out of business at the present time, their models were very kind to most of the anthracite railroad modelers. The service and repair section at the factory. The tests and operations section at the factory. A view of Lehigh Gap looking south about 1910. Note Lehigh Canal facilities next to the Jersey Central tracks. Lehigh Valley's Black Diamond Express headed by K3 class Pacifics, westbound under the L&E Bridge about 1931. Another trip has a locomotive 811 back in the 40s, stopped at the Gap for some reason. A double-header, 2 freight engines headed northbound through the Gap. It appears, looking at pictures of Lehigh Gap, many more steam locomotives are found of the Central Railroad of New Jersey. Probably the Central was more cash-ready. We now have a southbound Central New Jersey train passing under the L&E Bridge about 1950. In August 1955, the Lehigh and Delaware valleys were hit with very heavy wet hurricanes, one right after the other. The flooding affected Lackawanna most of all, with track washed out from Delaware Water Gap to Scranton, PA. It took over a month to repair the damage. Crews worked around the clock to get at least one track in the operation. In the meantime, trains were routed over the Main at Nescong, New Jersey, over the Morrison-Essex branch to Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and then onto the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Here at Lehigh Gap in August 1955, 2 Lackawanna westbound units are passing under the L&E Bridge on their way back to their own tracks near Scranton, PA. The photo was taken by Kermit Gary, who lived near the Gap. When passenger service on the valley ended in 1961, passenger locomotives were assigned to freight trains. Here are 2 PA diesels passing the L&E Bridge. In the late 1960s, a Central New Jersey freight passing an excursion steam train while under the Lehigh and New England Bridge is under demolition. We are looking south next to Route 248. A later steam trip shows the remains of the Lehigh Bridge. This is a high iron steam trip in 1968. The former L&E roadbed could be driven on to the Gap. Note the old house on the hill. A 1969 trip has Nickel Plate Berkshire headed south through the Gap. A 1984 NHRS fan trip to Jim Thorpe has Elco 424s on the head end. A special run to Jim Thorpe behind Reading 2102 in 1985. No trains today, although the line has been torn up, will be soon torn up rather. Erosion in the Gap is quite common, even in the steam days. Looking south near the Appalachian Trail in 1973. The Gap in 1900. Don't know what road it was then, but today it's Route 248. Note Victorian mansions, probably related to the coal fortunes. The former Jersey Central station at Lehigh Gap had been turned into a food market in the late 1950s. A view looking north, showing locations of previous picture. Looking south over Palmerton. The main street in Palmerton in 1982, looking east from the Chestnut Railroad Bridge that crossed Main Street. Palmerton, PA in 1982 from the Appalachian Trail. Palmerton was founded at the turn of the 19th century by Stephen S. Palmer, president of the New Jersey Zinc. The town was a planned community designed by a New York engineering firm. In less than 10 years, it grew to a population of 5,000 from European residents eager to work its industry. The Lehigh and Hudson Railroad once served the plant directly from its zinc mines in New Jersey. Most of the industry was shut down by the end of the 20th century. Rounding the curve at Palmerton, PA. A special observation car passing under the Chestnut Ridge Railway Bridge at Palmerton. North of the Gap, the end of the Delaware and Hudson freight train passes through the Gap on its way to Allentown, PA in 1973. Note boxcars on station siding. The Palmerton Central New Jersey station was all boarded up in October 1982. Today it's a commercial business. The Palmerton zinc plant was in full operation in 1973, and the valley was still single track, but barely used. Another view looking south. Looking west has a freight train passing the Coke Works in 1973. Note the central tower all boarded up. Aerial view looking northwest over the Gap. Bowmantown, PA is on the distance. Air turbulence that day was very high. Looking west over the zinc plant. The plant closed a few years later and was completely demolished by the 21st century. The 1920s Mack rail bus on the turntable on the Chestnut Ridge Railroad sometime in the 1970s. Note zinc shed in the background. The rail bus was used to transport work crews over the short railroad. The rail bus was purchased by the Lehigh Valley chapter of the National Railway Historical Society in the 1980s. It was partially restored at Topton, PA, and moved to Phillipsburg Railway Historian's storage shed. Here it is in 1999. That sneaky 1959 Chevy likes to get in my pictures. Where's my car filter? We move to the line at Weissport as the Jersey Central freight train is passing the station in 1971. Fan tripping nickel plate Berkshire is passing through Weissport on September 2015. It's headed to Jim Thorpe and the Lehigh Gorge. Turning the camera 180 degrees and the other side of the tracks, a Morristown and Erie fan trip is returning from Jim Thorpe in October 1985. An aerial photo I took in 1979 showing Weissport at the bottom and Lehighton, PA, west of the Lehigh. Previous two photos at lower right. Looking west in 1979 is the town of Lehighton, PA. The Jersey Central crosses diagonally across the center. Weissport is at the bottom. No bridge at the center of the picture in the distance. Looking north on the Lehigh Valley in 1910, Jersey Central Bridge is in the background. A northbound freight train is passing under the repainted Lehighton Tower. The old Jersey Central line has been relocated to connect up with Lehigh Valley, Maine. Lehigh Valley Alco Locomotive 628 has just passed under the bridge in the mid-1960s. These engines were known as White Elephants. A southbound coal train is in the late 40s passing under the bridge. Jersey Central freight passing over the bridge. The year and make of the auto is unknown. In October 1975, a last run was made over the Lehigh Valley before Conrail. Here is George Hart's CP 972, backing down to Bethlehem, PA. 4058, a 210-2 mountain lugger awaits a coal train. These locomotives were slow-moving mountain types used on heavy Lehigh Valley coal trains. A Jersey Central station and Lehighton citizens await the return of veterans from the First Great War. A Lehigh Valley station at Lehighton. A passenger exchange is made to Hazleton using the Bud car. Lehigh had two of these for branch line service. The Lehighton Yard at the turn of the century. Loco 5214, a 484 Northern type, leaving the yard southbound in the late 40s. Lehighton Yard was always a busy place. The far end was known as Packerton, named after Asa Packer, the founder of the railroad. Looking south at the Packerton repair shops at the turn of the century, Jersey Central tracks are in the foreground. We will now travel to Wind Gap, about 20 miles east along the Appalachian Trail. We're looking north in 1978. Note the gap in the background and many cement plants. Once, thousands of years ago, when glaciers melted, billions of gallons of water flowed through the gap. Lehigh New England Railroad once had a branch line that went to Sailor's Lake through the Wind Gap, which was abandoned many years ago. Another 20-something miles to the east, and we come to the village of Portland, PA, in 1966. The old Lackawanna Railroad station just behind the light pole at the center, Delaware Water Gap, is at the distance. About 10 miles south of the Water Gap, a Conrail coal train is crossing the Delaware River, headed for the Portland Power Station. A Conrail coal train is at the yard at Portland. At this time, coal trains were much reduced. Entering the Portland coal-fired facility in 1982, the tracks in the foreground lead to the old Lackawanna line to Washington, New Jersey, which was abandoned in the early 1970s. Just below Portland, the old line of the Lehigh, New England, over the Delaware, is under demolition in 1966. The 3-unit EMD F3 diesels restored by the Anthracite Railroad Society is headed to Spencer, North Carolina, pulled part of the way by Alco RS models in 2014. They will be displayed with dozens of other vintage units. Note Route 480 at the Delaware Water Gap just to the right. Returning from Spencer, North Carolina after a week at the show, they are passing the Lackawanna Station at Portland, PA on the old main line. At their home at Scranton, PA, they are on display with Atlas models, F units, and O scale. Man in the picture is Don Young, a Lehigh Valley chapter member. We are at Washington, New Jersey at the passenger station in 1914 on the old main line, as the new main line was being built further to the north. The line to the right went to the Delaware Water Gap, out of service by the 1970s. To the left about 15 miles and went to Phillipsburg, New Jersey. In 1980, the station was ready to be torn down and the old main line was out of service almost 10 years. The branch to Phillipsburg is still open today, 2023. A Conrail diesel in Erie Lackawanna colors had just come up the branch from Phillipsburg, New Jersey, headed to Netcong, New Jersey. John Williver, who passed away several years ago, lived in Washington, New Jersey. He was a huge Lackawanna fan who had a large bit of knowledge on the line. Here we are in 1983 at Phillipsburg, New Jersey on the CNJ Bridge. John had a large set of blueprints of Lackawanna facilities in Phillipsburg. We are now back at Delaware Water Gap. Train has just crossed the Delaware River Bridge on the new main line and is headed to Scranton, PA in May 1973. Crowd on the bridge is waiting for a steam special headed by Reading 2102, disguised as Delaware and Hudson 309. About an hour's wait, swinging the camera 180 degrees. Train is on the new main line, the old track next to the river. The previous day, the special had run over the Erie Railroad from Hoboken to Binghamton, New York. Here it is crossing a Sturicka Viaduct in Lanesboro, PA, in May of 1974. Back at Delaware Water Gap, a train is on the old main line with the Heritage unit passing the tower. The new main line is in the foreground. In 2015, nickel plate Berkshire 765 made a visit to Portland, PA. A record at Slater Junction in Portland in April 2014, just south of the Gap. In 1960, at the tender age of 18, I stopped at the scenic overlook in Delaware Water Gap with my new Chevy convertible. Cars of the late 50s and early 60s had a great image connection with jet aircraft, as seen on the side of this 1960 Chevrolet Impala. And less than 5 minutes later, a Scranton westbound freight came roaring through. The 4-unit FT diesel, just a few feet away. FTs were produced by General Motors starting in 1939. At first, they were coupled by drawbars because unions did not know how to accept them. Were they one engine or were they two? Overland 2-rail brass models Lehigh Valley painted on my bridge over the Delaware River in my basement. These models did come with a drawbar. Delaware Water Gap looking south on aerials I took in 1962. Route 80 is at the bottom, built over the roadbed of the Susquehanna and Wilkes-Barre and Eastern Railroads, which has long disappeared. Shut down about 1939. The Lackawanna is on the Pensy side. The station is just out of view at the bottom. Another black and white view I took showing the station just north of Route 80. The Lackawanna just north of Route 80 in 2015. It's under reconstruction, but money's the big problem. It depends on lots of donations. Arrowhead Island is in the middle of the gap looking north. The overlook stop where I took the Chevy picture is in the center. The New Jersey side of the gap is supposed to have an Indian head shape in the rocks, but I could never find it. Looking north up the Delaware, no piers in the river at the bottom. These piers were from the Wilkes-Barre and Eastern. The Tox Island Dam was a very hot political subject years ago just north of the gap. It was rejected after massive protests. A few night shots I took many years ago. This is a Phillips 66 oil refinery in Southern California. Now let's see what a double exposure can do. A first exposure for the sun and skyline, and over 1 hour later a second exposure with a heavy tripod. Yuba Crater in Death Valley in California, a very dry place, and nice to take night pictures because there's no humidity. An all-night exposure inside the crater walls facing the North Star. This gave me an idea to photograph sites around the country using moonlight and long exposure times facing north. Here are a few examples. At 3-hour exposure, Old Man in the Mountains, New Hampshire, Franconia Notch, I could not get facing north. An all-night exposure with a fisheye lens pointing straight up with the moon on the western horizon in Monument Valley, Utah. The North Star is a little tiny circle just degrees above the horizon. The moon was just too bright to catch the star trails. Meteor Crater, Arizona would have been a great place for a fisheye lens at night, but the area is privately owned and no one is allowed here at night. Today no one is allowed in the crater at all, just too many fears of lawsuits. At the same time, 1966, by signing in it was allowed. Here is a view near the sunset with a fisheye lens. Here is an exposure 6 hours long at Natural Bridges, Utah, facing directly north with a quarter moon. Full moon wipes out star trails. If you fall asleep, the crack of dawn ruins your picture. A cloudy night will not do. But the movement of the crescent moon across the sky eliminates shadows, and you must face north to get the circles. A whole book could be published photo-bound sunlight all over the country, but it would take years to do it. For some younger person with time and money, a great project. Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, near Half Moon in June 1978. 5-hour exposure. Indian Ruins makes a good shot, near zero humidity, but angles are limited to the North Star. Yellow-nosed Alco diesel locomotives of the Lehigh Valley at Patenburg Tunnel, New Jersey, in 1974. I took this shot I thought would be a great at night. Here it is after a 3-hour night shot. North Star is upper right, and it was no humid that night with no clouds. A 6-hour photograph of Sturgill Viaduct under the 3/4 moon. This stone structure was built in 1848 and carries the Erie Railroad west from New York. The North Star just above the second arch, as it makes a semicircle due to the Earth's rotation. A 4-hour exposure, 5 hours, pardon me, at the Arches National Monument in Utah of the Balanced Rock. The moon was just past the crescent stage. In winter with longer nights, we could get longer exposures, but you'd have to keep warm. 6-hour exposure on the Saguaro National Park near Tucson, Arizona. I almost missed the North Star, and an aircraft left a trail at the bottom.